in Dublin, and there's hotels that you can book from like a morning, like from like nine to
Okay.
2.
All right, this is the continuation of our October 4th, work session. We, came into open session, we went into executive session at 10 AM. It is now 2:15, and we are beginning with our discussion items, which is Riverhead 2, scoping draft comment review. This is for the Solar 2 project, so we need to submit our comments, by tomorrow at 4:30, so this is a review for the board. If we wanna add additional comments from what, the planning department has, written up, and so I will turn it over to you.
Alright.
Great.
So the document you have before you is a working draft right now. I still have to merge the comments into one comprehensive document, but it really just addresses some of the significant concerns that we want to send to the state siting board, so that they can contemplate it in their Article 10 review.
Okay.
I don't know if you'd like me, Jeff Seaman had about 47 points on there. I don't wanna go through 47 points. I think it would be pertinent to address some of the larger concerns that we have.
Okay. We'll just go by section for the ones that you know what section the ones,
It's kind of all over the place.
Okay, go ahead.
Towards the end, I mean, one of the significant impacts is definitely the loss of revenue, potential loss of revenue, economic impacts to the town, in the form of site plan fees, building permit fees, pilots, taxes, any importation fees that may need to take place, or export fees. I mean, those can be significant economic impacts to the town, so that's one thing that we would absolutely be sending to the siting board.
the one other question I had, I know, like, with an IDA, you can, waive the mortgage recording tax. Is there any ability for the state with these solar projects to waive that? Because you could have a county IDA waive that. Is there any mechanism in the state that would allow them to do that, and should we have that in here?
Looking at the Article 10 process, I haven't seen that as part of it, but if you wanted to make sure that that's addressed.
I would.
Suggest that we add it.
Yeah.
So, when you talked about, loss of revenue or, economic benefits to the town, they also need to take into consideration the CPF fund and the mortgage tax, because it's not being sold, it's being leased. And is it for a 45-year lease, where we can only negotiate a 15-year pilot versus a 20-year pilot? I mean, how long I was told that in their application, it's for a 45-year.
The Riverhead Solar 2 is proposing a 40-year.
40-year.
From what I understand, that's the duration of the time frame that they're proposing at this point. Now, just to give you a point of reference, the Riverhead Solar 1, the S-Power project that had previously been approved by the planning board, they came in, the duration of that was 20 years. That was codified when the special permit was issued. It was issued for a period of 20 years. There's a section in the code, a mechanism which would allow them to, by petition to the town board, they can extend it for 5 years.
Right.
But all of the temporal analysis for SECRA was done using the 20-year model.
Right, but their application is for 40 years.
Their application is for 40.
So, how do we address the pilots if we can only negotiate for a 15-year period?
I believe that was one of the comments in here was that 20-year discrepancy,
Where's that?
and they asked them to do,
Hi, Tammy, and that's pretty cool.
and, where is it? But it may need to be clear.
On page, it may be a different, but, number 42, which is page 10 of my document, it should be pretty close on yours. Comment 42 deals with the time frame, where the Solar 1 will be decommissioned after 20, Solar 2 is proposed as having a lifetime between 20 to 40. They find the variation, the town finds this unacceptable, and it's not possible to accurately or reasonably evaluate the impacts with a 20-year variation of time.
Right, so that's what was discussed in work session, but we weren't discussing the pilot payment. So when you talk about the economic, detriment, you know, we should, and is it a 40-year lease for the property, or is it a 20-year lease, and then they have to buy it, or they have to vacate? Is it, like, what does their lease document say that, the property owner has agreed to?
And I believe they say in their documents that it's proposed either lease or purchase, we're not sure which it is.
He said they were leasing it when he was at the work session.
I know, but in their scoping thing, I think they address both. that they hadn't made a commitment to it one way or the other, which I think is an issue that we don't know that, so.
And then runoff is a concern. Because if you have these rotating panels, then is there any time where it's going to be acting as an impervious surface where runoff is going to affect? Are they gonna be having drainage swales in between the rows of the solar panels, or are they going to be having, what are they basing their drainage on?
And I think to that point too is also, I think some of it addressed it with berms. You know, and as far as, this is open land now that it can accept the water, so are we gonna end up with a berm with a funnel coming out and potentially flooding our roads? I know we have, farm issue runoff all the time, so if you're now channeling this, how is that going to impact not only them, but neighboring areas, the roadways around there?
Yeah, that's why I want the drainage addressed, because there is no telling whether, when these panels are
Right,
facing
you're
directly
absolutely
up,
right.
where's the water going?
Correct. So that was one of the important aspects. I will update it to include the drainage. Visual impacts was obviously one. We've had issues at previous solar installations throughout the town where the screening was less than adequate. On the one on the east side of Edwards Avenue, F-Power did kinda go in and voluntarily supplement some of that landscaping, even though they weren't required to by code, but that's something that is discussed here. Types of vegetation, if they're gonna use natural vegetation, just throwing up a row of arborvitaes might not necessarily it may screen the facility, but it might not be necessarily in keeping with the native vegetation, so that's something that we wanna have them look at.
So
Well, they could always put a couple potato plants or something, right?
So with that, I think that's kind of one of my concerns, and especially in this big, long line of berm, that's obviously not visually interesting. Can they stagger the berms somehow? Can the berms be back further? And that's not necessarily the vegetated area, so you have the berms in further into the property, and then it's vegetated with native plantings on the outside of that berm, including, different heights, where you have trees and you have lower native grasses and things like that. And then the other thing, I have a question is as far as, because now you have something that's constantly being rotated, and that won't happen, and then you can end up with a lot of invasive species in this. I mean, I don't wanna see a wall of sort of Japanese
Bamboo.
or Japanese knotweed, that has become invasive, and they say that, okay, we're all good. I think it has to be something that is, a landscape design basically, and then the sustainability for maintenance.
Well, now, one of the important things is, that the Article 10 is not fully designed to just completely supplant the local codes. They are gonna, they should be designing their project to meet the local codes, local zoning ordinances. We have sections in our code on how these facilities are supposed to be screened, so that's something that they will need to take into account.
But I think it does go then, relates back to their buffer zones. So if we're requesting something like this, and our buffer zones for solar really they're movable, depending on what road they are, the way it's set up, correct?
The scoping document, I don't think it can hurt to add things to it, even though they're supposed to address it, we could, by all means, add that to this document, so
Okay.
it's on the record.
Are there wetlands on the property?
There are wetlands throughout, that was one of the things, they addressed in their review, they addressed DEC wetlands. The town of Riverhead also has jurisdiction with
Yeah, that's what I'm reading here,
150 feet of
150
wetland
feet,
areas. So the scope needs to address the potential impacts to our mapped wetlands, not
Right.
just DEC wetlands.
Okay.
Go ahead, do you wanna go?
Yeah, glare was one thing, when we did the Solar Power One facility, glare was analyzed, but it was not analyzed on the scale or magnitude of the project that they're now proposing. Being that it's in such close vicinity to FCAL with the active runways, FCAL being such an important economic factor for the town, we wanna make sure that these panels are not going to, produce glare for these airport facilities.
So are we requiring them to reach out to anybody for that?
There's a company, when we did the Solar One facility, we actually had the guy who literally wrote the book on developing solar around FAA facilities. So I would imagine that the applicant will reach out to a qualified professional who can analyze the glare.
But will they have to also be the end to coordinate anything with FAA regulations and reach out to the FAA, for their input on
I
this?
mean, we can update the scope to say, you know,
Just,
coordinate with, you know, FAA or involved regulatory agencies within the vicinity of the
okay.
area. There's the issue of, the unfair distribution of these solar facilities being sited within the hamlet of Calverton. But, you know, it's not even just Riverhead, it's not like they're spread out through the entire town. They're really centered within the zip code of Calverton.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
85% of like.
well, the 85, so those numbers, I wanna just kinda guide the town board. The end result of those numbers, with the current PPAs that are out and operating right now, if the Riverhead Solar One comes online and the Riverhead Solar Two, the net result of whatever's out there is about 40, it's roughly 50% of
So-
all solar facilities would be sited in the hamlet of Calverton, as opposed to the whole.
For all of Suffolk County or Nassau and Suffolk
Long
County?
Island.
So all of Long
Island.
Island, so
Yeah.
we would be citing 50% of all of the solar, so
For
we.
the island, within a highly concentrated area.
So I guess the question then becomes, if we are regional, we are really citing and providing clean energy regionally, you know, what is the community benefit that is realized by the town for doing that?
Our PSEG bill goes down 50%.
Well, there's gotta be regional significance somewhere, right? What is?
It's in there.
And
It's on
my other question
number
is,
17.
does having these large solar facilities then limit the ability of other facilities around there to put up solar themselves to reduce their bills? So you have a lot of other businesses on Edwards Avenue over there, are they now unable to avail themselves of renewable energy because of that? And how far out does that spread?
Another major condition, an issue with this was the easement under Edwards Avenue. You know, this Riverhead Solar Two facility is proposing to utilize the easement that was, is trying to be secured from the Solar One facility.
It's only 20 megawatts.
Well, and that was the big thing, you know, the planning board, when they reviewed this under the secret review with the information that they were provided with, one of the conditions of final site plan approval was that easement contained in the Gentile line can only be used to transmit the 20 megawatts at this facility. No other utilities, whether S-Power or other entities can use that, so I mean, that's gonna be a significant hurdle that they're gonna have to explain, and how are they gonna utilize the easement, which, to my knowledge, they have not secured that easement yet.
No, they're not.
No, that's
They stated.
that's our ace in the hole, bro.
Very standing in here, but even more so, I mean, I know that it's in here that we'll discuss the truck traffic that'll be generated by the substation and by the maintenance of the solar panels, and so I wanna know what mitigation they're going to put in for Edwards Avenue, which is a heavily traveled road with the jitney, with the school bus now, the depot being there now, which is mentioned in here, but there isn't any mitigation, or impacts of the road when the last time the road was developed. The Gentile line, they're going to be burrowing under the road and putting a conduit. So what if that fails? Who's responsible for the maintenance of the road around that conduit? Cause we own the road, so
Maintenance for the road, is that something, Bob, that could be handled during the easement, or during the negotiation?
Well, I mean, I think it should be raised in the
the study, the number of trips that'll be generated by the.
Well, during the construction phase, there's expected to be a significant amount of trucks coming in, so yes.
Right.
And are there any risks, you know, if you all of a sudden have flooding over there, or you have a car accident? You know, cause I don't think it's that deep in the ground off of either side, where they're burrowing under, because how far down are they looking to go under for the
Usually
easement?
go 36
They
inches
have
below
to
the
be,
frost.
they have to Below the be frost at
line.
least 36 inches, and my understanding is they'll go to, a depth of about 48 inches towards the center of the road, and then slowly makes its way back up on the east side to just about 36 inches.
So will there have to be signs there, will there be a visual impact from those
No, you don't
signs
even know it's there.
you know, that,
During the construction?
no, but I mean, you know, power lines in place, what are you putting there so that if, you know, whatever, somebody has a car accident there, or, and it's muddy out and they're down 1.5 feet and somebody sticks something in the ground, you know what I mean? Is there anything that needs to, I don't know what it is, that's what I'm saying.
it's piping,
What do you mean, what the plan for the Solar One project shows as far as its depiction?
No, if Solar 2 is gonna need an easement across Edwards Avenue.
Correct.
Having the line run underneath the road, is there something that needs to, identify that line is there?
Cable crossing sign
Cable
type thing?
yes, that kind of stuff, and who will maintain that?
How big would the conduit be? Any idea?
So all the lines that we've reviewed from Riverhead Solar One, we haven't really seen this Riverhead Solar Two project, were direct burial, so they're not actually proposing conduit through the land. Now, when you would go under a street, it could be direct burial, it could be a conduit, I don't know, because that easement hasn't been sorted out yet. So as of right now, there is no conduit.
Alright, but there may or
Well,
may not be.
as of right now, there's no conduit.
How big are these
proposed.
lines? Are they the size of a pencil, size of a drumstick?
I can review the Solar One plans.
I don't even know.
And I can send an email to the board with details of that. In terms of what's being proposed on the Solar Two, I don't think we've been provided with that level of detail.
Yeah,
Not yet,
because
no.
I would like to know the alternative method, so if they're just going to direct bury the lines and there is not going to be a conduit and the line fails and they have to dig up the road to fix it, like how long they expect that the road will be out of commission, how long they expect that, you know, I think it should
I'd be
be in a
surprised if they
conduit, I
didn't
think
put
that we
some
should
conduit.
require that, because
I would imagine.
Even if it's PVC
You know.
or something.
underground brakes under a roadway is not good for anybody, as
Yeah.
we've seen PSC&G trucks all over town.
My one other thing I know you were talking about for traffic impacts, the one thing that I didn't see in there, you have the Riverhead, School District, the bus depot, but the charter school. Because they used,
Do they come out on the,
Yes.
and then not only that, the charter school, I know that, you know, the kids are coming into school between 8 and 8:30 in the morning, and they're leaving in the afternoon, and if all this traffic is going past, it's additional traffic, you know, how are they gonna mitigate that and make it a safe area?
Does the board have any other questions, anything else that they would like to add?
no, I'm looking forward to reading this.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
Very
looking
good
at
reading so far.
I'm looking at the cumulative impacts of the many solar facilities that are proposed in the town, and I wonder what that does to property values within the vicinity. Whether it increases property values, or it decreases property values, or,
That's interesting. Yeah, I know individual solar is a plus, but I don't know about,
Imagine it increases.
Well, I mean, you know, when you're approaching the point where you're talking about 500 acres being devoted to solar.
Yeah, right.
You know, what's the percentage of industrial zone land and how much of that is gonna be occupied by these solar farms? And I just said, what does that do to the property values of the remaining?
Yeah, right.
You know, does it make it more expensive, less valuable, so we can update the scope to include that as well.
And then the
Would
other,
you like to add on to what was in this draft document, cause there was, mention that they analyzed cumulative impacts generated by a total of 5 generating facilities, that's on page 3.
yes, number
So
14.
you just want some further expansion on that.
Okay.
and then the other question is just, I know it's an industrial area, but it is being farmed now as far as loss of either prime farmland, I don't know what the soil analysis is there, so how is that offset being handled if we're losing, you know, cumulative 500 acres of farmland,
I think it's at that slight send anyway, cause it was sod for so many years.
I don't know, that's what
I
that's
know
why I'm
they take
saying,
like a
you know,
quarter
is what is it that we're?
Well, I know, in terms of the loss of soils, cause that was one of the big sticking points that came up with the planning board when they issued the POSDEC, was the potential loss of agricultural soils.
And there's a lot of that in here.
Yeah, and you know, the solar farms, they're, I don't wanna say temporary, but they're not the same intensity as if you were building a warehouse, where you're going down, you're digging foundations, you know, more or less, you know, they do some grading, they stick the pylons
Actually, it
on it.
regenerates the earth. over time.
But right now, we're looking at,
Turns it over.
you know,
Yeah.
one of the big goals of our comprehensive plan is the preservation of farmland in our community. And if, even if it's for 20 years that solar's on there, that we're not having our open vistas in our farmland, which is part of our comprehensive plan. So that kind of goes back to the community benefit portion of it, is that that's something our community is seeking to do, that, you know, really you're taking 500 acres out of that.
Well, that's why we restricted it just industrial areas and not into agricultural areas.
Agree,
Although
agree,
this was,
but it's not being
maybe
cited.
there shouldn't have been industrial land at one point,
But it's not being, I think that, you know, it goes to the point, why is it being cited here? You know, it's kind of, just a question.
I agree.
So this document has to go out tomorrow, so we're
Tomorrow,
gonna
fourth,
right.
assemble everything and circulate, another draft to the board, if anything comes to mind.
We
And then
can
I-
add it still.
And then when we send it off, we'll give a copy to Diane to put on the website, I assume, with the other Article 10 documents?
Do they have a building or a facility or in the substation, or is it just the lines themselves?
I don't, at the substation?
Yeah.
That I'm not sure, I will find out an answer for you.
I mean, does S-Power have a separate building?
No, PSE&G, cause PSE&G
Oh.
they own the land where the substation is
Correct.
what I was understanding from
Right.
Thursday's
Right.
meeting.
Right.
I'm just wondering if they're proposing any buildings for somebody that might be there that's on staff for maintenance or other things that,
As part of this project?
yeah.
Okay.
I'll look into that, and I mean, we can, even we can just address the scope, will there be any buildings or, you know, structures anywhere on the project
Good.
site, whether in the collection facility or the, you know, step-up facility?
Or off-site,
I know there
off,
was something in the
off,
preliminary
yeah.
scoping statement that said they were not looking to do any buildings, but I'm not sure, I don't recall if it said just for the project or whether it included the, you know, step-up facility.
But I think to Jody's point, I think it would be the generation of a building, not on site for this project, not within the envelope of this project, but are any additional facilities going to be generated at
Anywhere.
anywhere, which will be utilized by this.
I think we should donate a dozen Tesla cars to the town.
And we put some charging facilities in.
And put some
Yeah, that's
charging
what would be nice, for
facilities.
charging facilities.
Board have any other questions, any other concerns that they would like to get into this scoping document?
I love it, I can't wait to read it.
The health, safety, and welfare is in here, but I just,
You put this together pretty nicely, I don't know.
It was a collaborative effort,
It's-
I can't take credit for that.
job.
Well, I figured if I said that, you would probably give credit where it was due, but you didn't. No, I'm sure you all
it
did
was a
that.
collaborative effort, that's
Yeah,
why.
I'm sure it is, it certainly looks like it.
Health, safety, and welfare. Yeah, there were issues, you know, with they kinda give these generic statements, how the solar facilities promote health and welfare because they reduce the footprint of, you know, fossil fuel burning facilities. You know, one of the things that, there's no conventional power plants right now being proposed in Riverhead, so it's sort of just a generic
Generic,
statement,
yeah.
not sort of backed up by anything that's really coming in here, you know, we're not proposing a coal burning facility or a fuel burning facility here, so is it really a benefit to the host community when those negative items aren't really being proposed?
Right,
And
yeah,
and the power generation lines, I mean, the substation itself, is it, because, you know, people concerned about cell towers and the
Is
impact
there
that
any
it
sort
could
of
have?
magnetic frequency or
Well,
radio,
yeah, right.
any sort of electrical frequency that,
Right, right.
I mean, the charter school is right behind it, and I know that other projects in town that they have proposed where there are overhead wires, where the substation is overhead, they try and stay away from the overhead power lines, and not just because it's, complicated to build under the power lines, it's because they try and stay away from them, because of some magnetic,
whatever impacts that it may,
whatever,
yeah, whatever
health
negative, yeah.
impacts.
And I guess, you know, with that too, how would it be monitored over time? You know, as science evolves and things change, we learn new stuff stuff, how would that be?
Meaning how would the substation be
Well,
monitored, or
if
what
you're
are we
check,
gonna monitor?
if you're checking for,
Environmental.
if there's environmental issues, or for the power lines and stuff, they could say, okay, with today's science, we're fine, but, you know, will there be some sustainability over the 20 years if we discover 5 years from now, that it is an
There's a
issue,
public health risk,
and we
yes,
need to
right.
have it continually monitored, how is that being addressed?
I mean, nobody really knows why it, you know, Suffolk County leads in breast cancer for women, nobody knows why, that this region does
Right.
that. So is it,
And
is
I'd
it
be
electric,
curious
is
too,
it water, is it whatever?
as to the, right now they're proposing a 35 megawatt facility, but as technology gets greater and greater, they might be able to do a 70 megawatt facility on the same property, and what are the notifications to, you know, town elected officials and to other entities to let them know that, you know, the ampage or the megawatts is increasing.
The voltage, yeah.
That also comes in through the easement agreements, because they're only allowed, and the pilot agreements, because the pilot agreements are based on the megawatts. So if you change the megawatts, then your pilot agreement changes also.
Right, but how do we know?
Yeah, if
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
come in and just swap panels in the same
Exactly.
footprint, they're not, you know,
Or they
Right.
go to Brad and say, I'm submitting a building permit and I'm changing out this panel and I'm proposing this panel. I mean, how does Brad know that? I really almost think that we should have, you know, an expert, like we do with the cell towers, to analyze information that they're giving to us when they apply for a building permit to change out panels, that they pay for the town's
At their cost,
representative
absolutely.
to review their building permit applications.
Well, we can make part of the agreement that they, give us a yearly report of their generation.
Yeah, but our building department is full and we're low on staff, and so if we can have them pay for an outside agency every time they come in for a building permit to determine with us whether or not they're increasing the megawatts, or if they're,
I didn't pick up my daughter from high school, in 5 minutes.
Any other questions?
You guys are the best. The
Guys,
staff-
thank you so much
the
for pulling
staff in
this
this
together,
town
we look
is
forward to,
unbelievable.
the
Really.
final document.
Never ceased to
Greg, you
amaze
will be
me
sending
at
out
all.
final document?
yeah, I mean, I'm here late for the planning board meeting, so I'm gonna be working on this.
This town will,
But I mean
Now,
tomorrow, or
talking heads will
you're-
come and go a dime a dozen, but you guys really
just,
make it
I'm not
roll.
sure if I'm supposed to send it out, or if it comes out of your department, we were discussing this the other day, so, just,
I mean, I don't know who it comes, does it come out of town clerk, does it come out of your office?
I'm not sure, that's what we had a question with, where it's
You want
supposed to
money?
come out of, so, just let,
Town attorney's office, they got all the money.
Yeah.
just let me know, and then we can.
Absolutely,
Alright.
whatever you say.
Fine with me. All right, first and second, I don't need a first and second close work session, we're good.
Alright,
Thank you all.
Thanks, Bob.
All right, thank you guys.
Did you get everything?